Implementing automation in a mine is different from commissioning a piece of equipment. It requires thoughtful, coordinated approach between managers, maintenance, and operators. And many factors can influence the success in transitioning from standard manual operations to autonomous or semi-autonomous operations. Joining us today is Eddie Bilborough, Business Line Manager for Automation in Sales Area Canada. Hi, great to have you here, Eddie.
Hey, good morning, Martina.
Morning.
Nice to be here.
And thanks for joining us online too. Post your questions and let us know where you're from, and we'll try to answer them. And I know that Eddie can handle most of the questions, so keep them coming. So, Eddie, tell us a little bit about your background in the industry.
Yeah, sure. So I've got an education in mining engineering and mechanical engineering back in Australia. I've been fortunate enough to spend 13 years with Sandvik, both 6 years in Canada and another 6 or 7 years in Australia. So, yeah, I've been able to see a few different parts of the world. So.
That sounds good. And before we get into the details, I know that you've previously mentioned that implementing automation is very different from commissioning a piece of mobile equipment. Can you explain that to us?
Sure. So, with automation and with technology as a general rule, it really comes down, the success comes down to how it's planned and staged and introduced into the mine site. I mean, equipment has been largely the same process for some years and even decades in some instances. So there's a much more confidence and comfort in introducing a new piece of equipment that could be introduced much more easily into a mining operation or a project. So, there's a lot of different people have confidence in what that can do. With automation, it can be new or seen as different to what is the convention in a mine site. So, there really has to be several phases of qualification and kind of due diligence to kind of help people understand it and what it needs to do and how that gets managed as you introduce it to the mine. It just can't just show up one day and just expect it to just press the button and go kind of thing. So.
Okay, and what sort of aspects does a mine need to consider when doing this kind of advanced planning for an automation system?
Sure, yeah. With we've kind of seen it over the last kind of 3 to 5 years with automation really coming on as a kind of common theme in the industry of looking for productivity and becoming more efficient in their mining practices as they get challenged with higher costs and more remote operations and lower grade ore bodies. So, over the last couple of years, we've kind of been able to identify into kind of 3 to 4 different buckets of where kind of the planning or how automation and technology can be implemented and where a lot of the focus needs to come into. And I mean, it really starts with the management kind of side of things. So where the management need to kind of identify as a mine, how do they want to see their future, be it in kind of the 2-year time frame, in the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year time frame, or life of mine. And they need to really start with a mandate kind of saying they either want to be ex-productive or this kind of socially responsible or this kind of technology level. So it really has to start with them, and they need to enable kind of the stakeholders below within the company to kind of, okay, this is our mandate, how do we get there, and kind of thing. And that's where if you look at a typical mine, I mean, a mine can take anywhere up to 10 years plus to realization. So if the mine management starts with a vision for their operation, okay, once they know the ore body, okay, it's going to be an underground mine, it's going to be a marginal grade, or it's going to be a higher grade in certain areas, we're going to have to look at technology to help augment our productivity, to help lower our cost base, to be more productive with our costs. So with that, the next part of it is mine design. So, a lot of the early applications for automation and semi-autonomous equipment was kind of looking at a static operation or an existing operation that had a well-defined bottleneck in their process, right? So take a mine that's running at 9,000 feet below surface. So the people getting underground to operate that equipment, that could take them up to 2 hours plus, some instances 4 hours to get underground. So that's all non-productive time. So there was some mines that identified that and saying, even if we get 2 hours, 4 hours per day, that becomes 4 hours of productivity that we won't be able to gain. So a lot of the earlier applications for autonomous equipment was seen in these kind of shift changes and in these existing operations. But where the real potential comes from is starting with essentially a fresh sheet of paper with a mine design and saying, well, this is our mine design based on a base case, but can we optimize the mine to take advantage of that autonomous equipment and technology kind of thing? So we can really kind of push the benefits of technology. So that's a really kind of key one when you're starting to look at a technology. And the next one, and kind of I see it as being the most critical, seeing a lot of the operations that we have seen deploy technology and where they've kind of struggled to a degree, is around stakeholder engagement too. So, unfortunately, and we're waking up to it, but I mean, the idea of silos exists in mining operations. They are what they are, so to speak. So, stakeholder engagement across all those silos is even more crucial when it looked to a technology deployment. So it's one thing to have, the project have a deliverable of delivering the equipment and the technology, but they need to work with operations, with management, with maintenance, with IT, OT to make sure that once the project is delivered from their scope, it goes on through that pipeline so it can be augmented and integrated into that technology, into the operation successfully and sustainably. So people have a good founding of where we're going to get to. And the last point I'll just kind of speak to around kind of, points around kind of where we see technology being integrated is around setting expectations, right? So, I mean, one of the kind of common questions we get asked is, okay, so what kind of productivity will we see? This is our mine. Stick to a number, commit to a number up front and say, is it going to be 5%? Is it going to be 10%? Is it going to be 15% plus? And it's always difficult, right? Because each mine is unique. And that's why we all love, working in the mining industry, is because every day is new and every day is unique. But with that uniqueness becomes, that due diligence and that, each site you have to manage it on its own expectations. So I think a very key point is managing those expectations, both from our side of things as an OEM or a technology supplier, and the mine management, just to make sure that, it's one thing to integrate the technology, but it is a process and you need to manage those expectations and have milestone goals. So,
thank you. And we have a few questions here already from the audience. Are you ready for them?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, so first one is from Goodwin Zomba. He is an electrical and instrumentation specialist and wants to know any Sandvik online courses that we offer.
Hey, Goodwin. So great question. With online learning, and especially in this day and age of COVID, obviously, being able to communicate and learn online is very crucial, or is becoming more of a demand, I should say. So at the moment, we are establishing online learning tools. I'm not sure if they're available to the broader community at this time, but that's something definitely that we'll be looking at going into the future. But I do know those tools are available either for our internal Sandvik people or our existing customers, but I just don't know if they're available to the broader community at this time.
Thank you. And then we have another question from Ishant Gupta. He wants to know if geology affects automation and to what extent.
Good question, Ishant. So my comments around geology is, yes, of course. I mean, it's all kind of interconnected, right? So, I mean, a couple of ways the geology could impact it could be, how the mine is laid out kind of thing. So whether you've got poor geotech or poor, could define how you kind of lay out your drives and the size of your mine that kind of limits the potential for the success of automation. So, I mean, if we look at different mining methods, if the geology in the ore body is a cut and fill or a smaller scale operation, does the return on investment with automation look as good as, say, a larger block cave operation like a porphyry deposit where you're mining in a largely static or fixed mining zone for years in some cases, compared to a cut and fill, which is a different ore body in geology. So, to answer your question, yes, it does play a role, but it's only one of many.
Thank you. And to you just joining, I just wanted to kind of summarize that we are speaking to Eddie Bilborough. He's a BLM for Sales Area Canada and specializes in automation and the transitioning from or onto semi or fully automated mines. So, Eddie, to continue, when it comes to project deliverables, why is it so important for an operation to define from the outset what success looks like for that specific mine?
Yeah, so I spoke about it in the last kind of comments around managing expectations. So, I mean, we all have to answer to somebody, right? We all have deliverables that when we want to invest in something, great. So we also want to make those commitments. Be it C-suite management up in Toronto or Vancouver or South Africa or Australia kind of thing. You kind of manage your expectations to your shareholders and say, look, we're going to go out and our mine's going to be autonomous, or our mine's going to be technology, the most technology advanced mine. And then, if you don't deliver on that quarter, then, they come back to you and say, well, where's our technology? Where's our most efficient mine? You promised us, kind of thing. So, it's important to have that kind of that vision of where you want to get to, but it's also important to say, look, these things need to be managed in phases. And you can kind of really start small. I mean, that's the nice thing about some of these technology, how they've evolved and developed, is you can really start small and start in scale. And then as that maturity and as that experience and confidence increases, you can start hitting managed expectations and deliverable goals along the path. You can kind of ultimately realize, okay, if we just take a step back and look at the total mine, now we've been able to realize that whether it's a 3%, whether it's a 10% productivity gain, or whether it's a kind of safety related metric, or whatever your goals are. But really planning that expectation is really a kind of key point.
Thank you. And what is one of the most overlooked parts of the process to realize value from an investment in automation, would you say?
Sure. So, I kind of touched on it earlier again, which was stakeholder engagement. So,
okay.
Yeah. So with stakeholder engagement, what I mean by that is, it's not just introducing a piece of technology in an isolation kind of thing. It has to be, all the different stakeholders within the mine. So it could be, the operations. One of the key things and kind of one of the perceptions around automation is that operators are going to be losing their jobs. And that's from what we've seen around, that stakeholder engagement. It's basically, communicating to them that, no, actually, you're not losing your job. It's relocating that job from underground, where you have to, put on your overalls and put your hard hat on, and, you get exposed to noise and dust and, darkness for 12 hours a day, potentially in some instances, to you get to sit on surface, wear some comfier clothes, air conditioned, no noise kind of thing. So, it's all about communication with that stakeholder engagement to it, and it's managing that perception that, this is not. It doesn't have to be a scary thing, but it's it shouldn't be a means of withholding people back. But if you don't get that stakeholder engagement piece right, it can really erode the value of that return on investment, right? So you could have a project deployment, and then you could have a successful deployment where, hey, everybody's happy, but if then it gets handed over to operations and they haven't been involved, then they'll find you'll find that the use of the technology, once it kind of goes, at the first point, it might kind of start being less utilized. So, but if they're engaged to the process and they have engagement through it, then you could get a much better result.
Thank you. And we have a lot of questions from the audience today, so I'm gonna get one here. And this is actually about Nutrax. We interviewed one of the Nutrax staff earlier. So how does the acquisition of Nutrax affect Sandvik's automation outlook, is Tim Pakingi wants to know.
Really good question. So, so Sandvik and Nutrax partnership started, I want to say, best part of 12 months ago, maybe close to 18 months ago. And they're doing a lot of exciting things around telemetry and equipment health. But then they're also getting into, which is something that's really exciting in the industry, is collision avoidance. So at the moment with automation, it's kind of restricted to manage the equipment safely and the technology safely. The equipment itself has to be isolated within a restricted space or an isolated area that prohibits operators and people from entering that zone to be able to interact and be able to operate that equipment properly. the Sandvik and Nutrex partnership relates to automation, and what's really exciting when that kind of the collision avoidance piece comes into it is, this vision of an integrated mine where you can operate autonomous equipment with manual people interacting in a dynamic area. If we can really kind of nail that kind of collaboration between the collision avoidance and the autonomous equipment, that could be the potential, right? So, I mean, to do that safely, obviously, of course, but to be able to do that, that's really that would be, in my mind, one of the successes of that partnership with Nutrex.
Thank you. And I don't know if you've touched upon it already, but when talking about automation, it's not just for new and modern mine sites. It's also about adapting to new situations in mining. I know that you told me a little bit about that. And so how can that be applied if you're running an older mine? Why would you go into automation?
Yeah, sure. So as we said, I mean, back some of the earlier installations and applications for automation were clearly defined bottlenecks or lost time productivities in an existing operation. Also safety instances as well. But mostly, these large kind of bottlenecks and lost time in productivity. So with an existing mine, I mean, there's two kind of ways you can look at it. As I said, one of the applications could be looking at an existing part of the process of material haulage and where you're seeing these kind of big times of lost time. And how you can kind of integrate automation into that part of the process, and does the business case warrant? Okay, we're losing 6 hours a day. What's the return on investment if we only get those 6 hours a day back in productivity? Is there a business case there? Yes or no? We've had some sites where they've done the business case and they've justified. We could have a loader or a truck parked underground for those other 18 hours of the day and just run an automation for those 6 hours. So it really comes down to the business case of each mine. But the other nice part of it, or the other part we're starting to see more of, I guess, is for an existing operation is starting to look at, hey, we've either got parts of the mine that are unsafe to mine or uneconomical to mine because of the cutoff grade or the cost of mining in those areas. How can technology help, lower our cost base or lower our, still provide safety operations and get access to that part of the ore body? To facilitate or enable increased production rates in those parts of the mine. So that's really one of the kind of cool things about kind of automation too, is kind of looking at the existing mine through a new set of eyes of what's possible.
Thank you. And as a supplier, are there any other ways to prepare a mine for automation?
Sure. So with Sandvik, I mean, as a technology supplier, we've been doing it for some time now, and as I said, each mine's unique, but I mean, and I've touched on a couple of common themes that have happened, but we've been doing automation in some capacity since 2004 with our loaders and trucks down in Chile. And we've identified that over the years the experience within the industry has been a bit of a gap. So Sandvik as to ultimately realize the success of the technology, right? Because if it doesn't work, there's a magnitude of reasons why the technology may not work. But at the end of the day, to Sandvik, it doesn't work, kind of thing. So we're invested in that technology and seeing it being a success. So we've made some investments over the years in employing specialist mining engineers that they have a real strong background in kind of mining applications, and kind of through their experience with Sandvik, they've been getting a lot of exposure to other automation sites and how to integrate and what realizes success with mining engineering, being able to integrate that technology on a sustainable basis.
All right. And do you have any examples of opportunities that you have identified that would improve the production cycle?
Yeah, so there's actually a solid ground story that Sandvik does our own internal. I think they're on the YouTube or something like that. But there's a solid ground story from New Afton mine out in BC there, where they or British Columbia, Western Canada, I should say. Sorry, I'm realizing we're dealing a bit more globally. In any case, they had they've got a block cave operation there where they've got some what we call mud rush in their draw points there, which basically prohibits people from operating in these parts of the mine. So they looked at automation from a safety perspective. and saying, okay, with autonomous equipment, we can still access these parts of the mine safely and productively. So that's where their journey started. And then once they started getting the technology installed, they started looking at, well, okay, we're still getting those tons, but can we get those tons more efficiently and more productively? And one of the exciting things for them was they started looking at the cycle itself and where they mapped the whole kind of tramming cycle and where they're seeing some slow points or some dead points in that kind of cycle, and led them to kind of look at, okay, well, rather than a 90-degree turn where we basically have to stop the loader and turn in and turn to 90 degrees, can we kind of do like a sweeping angle, which basically allows the operator or the autonomous equipment not to slow down at all and kind of continue on around that draw point. So, yeah, that's kind of an exciting case there of kind of, okay, I mean, and we kind of think of it like, okay, well, how much time really is that going to take off? It may only be 5 seconds, but on a 2-minute cycle, when you're doing 100 cycles per day, it's 10,000 cycles per month. That's a multiplying factor kind of thing. So that's kind of one of the exciting things that come with, with some of these different operations when they start looking at, okay, we've met our KPIs or we've met our value proposition for automation. How can we take it to the next level and really push the technology into our mine plan?
Yeah, and that story is actually a brilliant example, and I think you can go on and Google mitigation mud rush or mud rush mitigation. That's the name of the story, and yeah, it's on YouTube and also on Solid Ground, so give it a try. And so we have a few more questions actually. I think this one is interesting since we're hitting a global audience. It's from Adrian Alarcon. He's a mining and construction sales and support. What about the digital support from Sandvik in Latin American countries?
Yeah, so with the global, Sandvik being a global company, obviously we've got pockets of expertise around the world, primarily based in Chile being one of them, and that's been a long-term site of reference for us, and then Canada, and then we have Australia kind of coming on, and then parts of Africa, pockets of Africa, and then pockets of Europe, and now Russia's starting to come on board too. So 100%, I mean, being able to support these systems in a digital age is really important. I mean, the nice thing about being digital is that we can kind of connect in any parts of the world, and I mean, there's been a lot of work going on in the last couple of years to make more of it remote-based support that facilitates, we can actually, whether we log in or whether we can, do it remotely, support over a phone or, a phone connection or something like that we can able to support. That doesn't matter whether you're in, the Andes, operating at 4,000 meters above sea level, or whether you're in Kazakhstan, as long as there's a phone connection there or, an internet connection, the capacity to support and get access to that critical expertise. So you're not relying on, we get the right person for the job, so to speak, and they could be based anywhere in the world. So,
yeah, good. And just for you, if you just logged on, we're here with Eddie Bilborough. He's the business line manager for Automation Sales Area Canada, and he's answering a lot of questions at the moment about automation and the transition from a non-automated to an automated mine. And we have another one. This one we touched upon when we had our prep talk, Eddie. It says, how can you get stakeholder investment if they feel like they might lose their jobs?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, it's same in any industry. It is a tough conversation, but it has to be a conversation. I mean, you can't not have that conversation, or not do something because it's perception. But I mean, there's so many different things you can kind of help to help with that conversation around job losses. I mean, there's been several papers and anecdotal reports coming back from sites that do have automation. Is in fact they don't actually lose their people. They kind of keep the same amount of people or actually add people. But the value return is not necessarily losing people, but it's keeping the same amount of people but being more productive per person kind of thing. So
yeah. And also that we touched upon earlier is that it might require a different skill set. And I mean, that is about developing the people.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, I mean, there may be some people that have been, their life as a miner, and they've been underground working on a loader for the last kind of 20 years, 30 years, and kind of the idea of automating a piece of that piece of equipment doesn't have to mean that they're losing their job, kind of thing. We still need that interaction, and we still need that expertise that they can bring. They may have to augment their position or their role, so it means they're not going underground anymore. But that's where each site is unique, and how you kind of manage that kind of conversation and what that position could look like, because that position does look differently depending on how your mine is operating and what part of the world you're in. And it's not that far in the future where, as I said, I mean, if you got connectivity, you can run the equipment from a local community or something like this. So I mean, it's the idea of the operators losing their job. I don't think that's not the future. I mean, I might be a bit naive, and this is me talking personally here, but I mean, the idea that technology enables more mining to happen. I mean, all of a sudden, instead of having one mine in that mining area, you could justify economically, at least, to have multiple small-scale mines that have a smaller carbon footprint, but you can have several different satellite mines, which means you need multiples of people, or it extends the mine life. That mine, okay, instead of 2022 it shuts down, you can economically mine it until 2025 plus. So I mean, there's different ways to look at the technology. I mean, I accept that and kind of acknowledge that that is a consideration, but it's just something that needs to be managed and communicated to within the community or within your stakeholders of how that would look.
Yeah, and also we touched upon the possibility of diversity. I mean, I know that Sandvik, for instance, is recruiting a lot of more women into mining, and we touched upon automation being actually an enabler for that. Could you just...
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's always... the stereotype of a miner, I guess, is something that's been around for some time. Whether it's the coal miner back in the 1800s in England or something like that, it has to be a man, and they go away to the mine and you don't hear from them for, in these days, it's weeks at a time. But, the idea of what a miner looks like in the future could look significantly different to what it's looked like in the past. And again, the idea of having remote operations as a concept, can we have an operations hub that's based in a local town or a local community that opens up to more of the market, right? So you don't need to be this, whether it's a 20 to 60-year-old guy becomes a miner. Now all of a sudden you can have a young mother kind of thing, or you can have somebody that's physically not able to kind of manage going to a mine site at a time. And by being remote, that means you can be home at every night, or you can be closer to your family every night. So that, as I said, they're still going to need people on these mine sites, but the idea of, again, augmenting that operational, how that looks, could really open up different demographics to mining. And that's the really exciting part of what technology can offer.
Thank you. And we actually have a question on this. It was good here. Eddie, could you clarify the difference of remoting and automation?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of these words kind of are used interchangeably in the industry. So most mines in the current climate would kind of refer to remotes as what we call radio remote control, which is line of sight operations typically, and they've been used at least here in Canada, for some time. And they don't require any kind of connectivity or any kind of they rely on communication over radio signals, I should say. So what that does is it also prohibits the distance and how kind of far away you can get away from the machine and still be able to maintain that radio connectivity. That's kind of been used as one kind of form of being able to operate the loader or a piece of equipment, say, in short distances. But that has its limitations and it's pros and cons, but it kind of is a good foundation and starting point. So that's what I would consider what I would call remote radio control. And then with autonomous, you kind of, it just enables more of a remote connection to the piece of equipment. So that be at a centralized underground hub that's at a certain part of the mine, away from the operating equipment, or you could be on surface, be immediately in the mine, or you could be kilometers off the mine site. So autonomous equipment can still be semi-remote or semi-autonomous. within its capacity, but it's still being monitored.
Okay, and I know that this question is one that I like. It's, do you anticipate any novel collaboration opportunities with non-traditional partners that have experience operating autonomously in extreme environments, for example, space exploration companies?
Yeah, I mean, if you go on even publicly listed companies, there's probably more mining, asteroid mining companies on the, on the TSX or the Nasdaq or something like that have, that are looking into technologies of how we mine on the moon and or an asteroid, for example. Sorry, I should say. Then kind of how we're going to, and we kind of take that same concept and we say, well, how do we mine in a northern remote location, or in our case, being in the northern hemisphere, I should say, in whether it's northern Canada or parts of Siberia or parts of, the concept of mining in those remote locations, it still comes down to the same fundamental concept of mining on an asteroid. It's connectivity. So the possibility to collaborate around autonomous equipment connected to back to Earth or back to a remote operations hub in a city or a town. It's really important. But yeah, I mean, there's opportunities. I mean, the other one too would be deep sea mining too, right? So I mean, the connectivity around deep sea mining, the opportunities there. But that's the exciting part around. I'm sure that what we do in the northern and remote parts of the world for mining with autonomous equipment and remote support, it's going to bleed into and it's going to cross over into mining and beyond our Earth.
Thank you so much. And we get a lot of questions, and I know that you have promised to answer them after the session if we don't get to them all, and you will answer them in the feed and make sure that people get their response. So yep. I'm still interested in mines that are not yet automated. How do they find out if automation is for them?
Sure. So that's typically, I mean, like most things, you may not have a background in or a firm understanding in it. It's like, where do I start? How do I start? I mean, it's no different to buying a new car. It's like, well, where do I start? What's the difference between this car and that car? So, I mean, there is a lot of material online, not just on Sandvik, but I mean, there's several other searches you can do online. I will reference there's a group out of Canada called the GMG Group. And they've kind of identified some of the frameworks that help kind of install or look to deploy technologies in mines. And then they've covered automation, but also connectivity and BEV, and it's different things. So they can also do. That's a good starting point for some background literature. And there's more and more videos coming online, and So the other part of it too is obviously Sandvik with our experience kind of thing is contact your local Sandvik person, and they can obviously help kind of, whether it's just kind of an informal conversation or a presentation or whatever that looks like. But I mean, there's a lot of people that can help, and it's typically just asking is normally the first starting point, because you don't know what you don't know.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I really appreciate having you here, and you have a lot of questions still to answer. So
okay, I'll clear my schedule for the rest of the day then.
Yeah, and get to those questions. And to the rest of you, don't miss our next live session on September 8th. We'll speak to colleagues in Ghana, Finland, and the Netherlands to learn how our remote monitoring service, one of the latest developments in our digital services offering, how that is helping customers maximize data to increase uptime. Thank you so much for watching.